never done this before, so we'll see how it works. Sometimes best laid plans. Oh, hang on a second.
Oh, careful.
Just a quickie.
Mm-hmm. Yes, needed it.
Like, wait, what's wrong?
Okay.
I was gonna say, your clock there is perfect.
I'll close the door.
Oh, no, it's fine. Oh, I just realized that. All right, well, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to our first ever virtual gallery talk. We have an amazing artist lined up for you guys tonight, Scott Frankenberger. He is an incredible potter who is also an incredible person, and you guys are really gonna enjoy hearing from him tonight. I know you are. If you have, there is going to be a chance for some Q&A at the end of this presentation. You can submit your questions and answers, or not your answers, but your questions in the chat box on Zoom. And if you're watching via Facebook, you can submit those in the comments and we will get to some of those at the end of the presentation. Also, if you are watching this on Zoom and you want to open up another a browser and share the live Facebook video so that your friends can join in with us, feel free to do that. Highly encouraged. And with that, I will turn things over to Kendall, who will introduce Scott.
Thank you, Caitlin. Welcome to tonight's gallery talk by artist Scott Frankenberger. I'm Kendall Smith with the Art Museum of Greater Lafayette, and I'm happy to tell you that the museum is now open to our members and will open to the public on July 7th. Entry to the museum is always free, but in order to maintain our capacity limits, we have implemented a ticketing system. You can look on our website for tickets to come in and see Scott's 45-year retrospective exhibition titled Explorations in Clay and Glazes. See it in person. His show fills 2 galleries with examples of pottery from his private collection, spanning 5 decades. In the meantime, look on our website for video presentations by the artist. More are in production and will be posted throughout the summer. A live reception is also being planned for August 13th in honor of Mr. Frankenberger's career as a master potter. Scott received his Bachelor of Arts degree from Lawrence University and later worked as a ceramic artist in his basement studio while making his living as a full-time production potter. He continued to his education and completed a Master of Arts degree at Purdue University with a specialty in ceramics. Since 1974, he's produced and sold as many as 3,000 unique hand-formed pieces per year, which can be found for sale in many galleries in the United States, including the Art Museum shop. We've just created an online store, so now you can make purchases from your home as well as coming into the museum and purchasing in person. Scott's work has been nationally recognized and is included in several public collections, including the Smithsonian National Museum, and of course, the Art Museum of Greater Lafayette. We're thankful for these friends of Scott Frankenberger who made this exhibition, the videos, and the gallery talk possible. Tom and Susan McCulley, Joan Sozin, Tom and Beth Bridge, Jim and Sandy Bodenmiller, Tom and Mary Jo Sparrow, Bruno and Mary Moser, Ken and Denise Bootsma, and the Lafayette Hearing Center, and particularly to our community partners, First Source Bank, Keystone Architecture. Now, please welcome my good friend, Scott Frankenberger.
Welcome, everyone. As you can see, the retrospective at the Lafayette Art Museum runs now until August 30th. I'm honored that the museum chose to celebrate my still ongoing career, even though I have to cope with the COVID crisis now. I'm not getting as much work done. Members can see the show through the controlled reservations now at the Art Museum website, and the public can see the exhibition in person after July the 6th. Go to the museum website for details. This is a controlled walkthrough of my exhibition. It's not necessarily in the order that the pieces in the museum are on display, but I wanted to highlight things sort of in a chronological order for the story that I want to tell. This is a panoramic view of one of the areas of the exhibition. This is from the east end of the east, or the north end of the East Gallery. There's also pieces in the McDonald Gallery as well. The exhibition commences with a display of dinnerware that is roughly chronological, starting in the upper left, going to the lower right. I started making dinnerware in 1974, first for myself and then for customers. The sets started out with just plates, and then bowls or cups or dessert pieces or other serving pieces would be added. Here are some of the plates from over the years, and the sets might have been just sets of 2, sets of 4, 8, 10, or more. I seldom made plates as stock. Rather, dinner plates were customized for each customer in consultations about shape, glazes, and degrees of matching. My favorite orders would be, do what you want. I always made extras so the customer could get the best for their set and could buy extras for breakage that comes with time. And I kept several examples from my personal set as well. This is from my earliest ceramic classes at Lawrence University. In many beginner ceramics classes, there is the challenge to make an 8-inch cylinder from 1 pound of clay. These are examples from a variation on that test. It's advancing by itself. These are examples from variations on that test from my undergraduate class at Lawrence. After many failed attempts to make forms that I envisioned, like cups, bowls, and vases, I decided not to move forward until I could make a reliably tall cylinder. These are two survivors from that self-imposed series, self-imposed constraint series. What's happening? Oh dear. Can you see?
Yeah. Yep. Let me look and see here.
Mary Jo has intervened. Okay, I'll try again.
World. Hang on one second. Mary Jo. Who's Mary Jo?
Mary Jo Sparrow.
Oh, hang on one second. Let me see if I can fix this here. Sorry, guys.
Okay. All right. These are some tea bowls from my first efforts after college graduation and before I had access to a workshop. I prospected clay from embankments along roadsides and made tea bowls, although I seldom drank tea, but the reference book that I had featured tea bowls. These were fired in a makeshift Raku kiln.
There you
Not
go.
long after these experiments, I landed a teaching job at Harrison High School where there were wheels and a kiln. We also did some Raku firings outside the classroom, which involves yes.
Yeah, so I got the other screen off. So if you want to try sharing your screen again.
Okay, is it? Okay, I'll try one more time. Technical difficulties.
Hey, we've never done this before. This is good.
Okay, so share screen, here we go.
Here we are. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah, there you go. You're good to go.
okay,
Try and look up one when you're reading.
okay. All right, did we hear my little talk about the Raku bowls? About how they were from the roadside clay that I prospected?
Why don't you go over it again now that we have the image in front of us?
Yeah, these are 3 primitive tea bowls representative of my first efforts after college graduation before I had access to a workshop. I prospected clay from embankments and made tea bowls, though I seldom drank tea, but the reference book I had featured tea bowls. These were fired in a makeshift Raku kiln not long after experiments. I landed a teaching job at Harrison High School. There were wheels and kilns there that I didn't have at home. We also did some Raku firing outside of the classroom, which involves rapid firing and unforeseen results, and often excites the students to further explorations. It worked for me. So after teaching at the high school for 2 years, I got an opportunity to pursue graduate studies in clay at Purdue. My excellent mentor was Marge Levy, who inspired us to find our own directions and not copy her work. I resumed my interest in Raku firing there, and now I was much better on the wheel. I made dozens of large bulbous vases and smaller forms. I experimented with stained surfaces, that means there's no glaze, and surface decoration, sometimes with spectacular results. Unpredictably, they also sold well. There was a seed there that I might be able to earn at least a partial living as a potter after getting my master's. These are some more of those Raku forms. I worked with slab forms and made shields for hanging on the wall. I formed them much as you would for making a pizza. I would stretch the clay outward by hand tossing or tossing it onto work tables. During the stretching, the markings that I would make would stretch out and smaller pieces of clay would be added to enliven the surface. Once they were dry enough, I added leg supports on the back or nubs for wall hanging, and eventually they were Raku fired to enrich the surface. I like to think of some of them as windows into a universe, into another universe. These are some playful pieces from my time of teaching at Purdue to encourage students to explore and to be creative. The cookie jar uses a sprig mold using animal crackers to make decorations on the outside of the jar. The teapot was made quickly as students watched, forming 2 bowls and squishing them together to make the teapot body, then adding the spout and handle and legs quickly before the teapot would collapse. It was not my usual style, but it was made to encourage spontaneity and discourage overthinking in the students. These are examples of work that I started making while still a graduate student, and I was beginning to make stoneware pottery at home in a converted basement workshop. I entered some art fairs and sought gallery outlets. At some point, my work caught the attention of someone at the Indiana Arts Commission, and they commissioned work for me to create commemorative platters for the 1977 Governor's Arts Awards. This one on the left in the middle is an example from that series. It was a nice boost to my career, and at the time I was very interested in the intersection between active gestural glazing and decorating and dynamic forms. My model was a well-known potter in Michigan, John Glick. He was making a living as a potter doing inventive work, which was my aspiration. My other main influence at the time was Don Pilcher from University of Illinois Champaign, and his precision work and slip trailing intrigued me. In the early 1980s, I was producing a lot of kitchen and tableware. Occasionally, I would try to work a little larger. So visible here, and there's a large bowl in the center at the top, which you can't see down inside of, but when you go to the exhibition, you'll see what can happen with the variability of materials that you buy from suppliers. Depending on the vein in the clay mine, the clay that the potter receives may have more or less impurities in the batch. In the bowl at the top, there's a lot of free iron that caused a lot of heavy spotting in the clay. It's invisible until you fire it in the kiln, and you're stuck with it when it comes out with this rich blossom of black spots in the white glaze. This series, the Whiteware or Hairy Pickles series, seemed to develop out of nowhere, having a life of its own and forcing itself on me. It came about in 1984 and may have been a subconscious way of resetting my creative platform. It was an intense and in many ways fun exploration. In retrospect, it was connected to impressions of underwater life forms that I made that I discovered on scuba diving trips with my father and my children in Cozumel, Mexico. If you look closely, you can see a lot of floating forms. It looks like space, but they actually came back to me in the creative process, looking like underwater life forms. Here's a close-up of a teapot, and the name Hairy Pickles came from the daughter of a friend who said, "Why does your pottery have hairy pickles on it?" So the name stuck, and I did this work for about 3 or 4 years, and then I moved on. Also at this time, I was working kind of in conjunction with some other potters in the area, and we like to experiment. We like to do things together that we weren't doing on our own. We made a salt kiln. A salt glazing is a technique that goes back, way back into the 15, 16, 1700s. And it comes from throwing salt into the kiln while the kiln is firing, and the salt deposits on the clay and makes this sort of stippled, somewhat unexpected surface. It's not unlike raku at a very high temperature. Also at about this time, maybe around the late 1980s, I made a switch to porcelain from stoneware. And that was in part because you get a truer look of what your glazes look like. It's like painting on a white canvas instead of a brown canvas. Also, porcelain is considered sort of the next step after stoneware. It's harder to manipulate, it's harder to control. And so it was sort of a challenge to myself. After some fumbles, I gained some control over the clay, and it became, for me, more cooperative, but about as cooperative as working with cream cheese. A companion piece to this one was accepted into the Smithsonian Museum's American Porcelain Survey Show of 1980, which was a nice feather in my career hat at the time. Over the years, I have made dozens, if not hundreds of platters. I'm sure that many hang on walls and are never used as a platter. As ceramic paintings, I like them to have a sense of a night sky or a Hubble image that draws the viewer closer in. I want viewers to look into them, not at them. This is a triptych that I created as a celebration for a local professor upon his retirement. It was a gift from his 3 children. I had never worked at this scale before without using tiles or a cumulative substructure. This was a test of my skills and my kiln to pull it off. I had one shot and it worked. The plant forms are related to his research. The rest is where my mind went. Sometimes I articulate the rim of platters for variations by stretching, scalloping, ribbing, or other methods. Here the platter edge is carved. Also, I can get carried away with gestural possibilities, underglaze stains, slip trailing, glaze overlaps, overglaze stains, stains over stains. When to stop? Is it ever too much? This is a detail of the previous platter. I'll toggle back and forth so you can see in the middle there. The closer you get, the more you see. Another large platter of loose colored slip trailing that's rising through the glazes. Slip trailing is like painting with clay onto clay. You put the clay in a bottle like a cake decorator and squirt it or decorate onto the surface of the platter, in this case, that you've already made. I like these large platters to behave as a visual field, like I've shown previously, and harkening back to the Raku platters, like you're looking into another universe. This series lasted a few years alongside my regular production in the early 1990s. It was an attempt to explore a more severe style with very little decoration, if any, and just 1 or 2 glazes. The other goal was to create a sense of weight or density in the light form. Potters often take side trips to isolate creative issues or to try on new ideas. I like to combine techniques wherever possible, and it usually leads in unexpected directions. This trays from a series of thick pucks of clay that I put on the center of the wheel, then loosely center it and mark it with a spiral groove. Then I take it off the wheel and stretch it like a slab or a pizza, and the resulting surface looks incongruous at first, but it adds dimensions to the form. Handles are added for usefulness and for contrast. The tall pitcher is extruded, and if you stay till the end of the talk, I have a little slideshow of the techniques that I've used here. The tall pitcher is extruded with additions. It takes on a bird-like form. The gravy boat is first thrown, and then squeezed and altered with additions added. These are forms I have made in other ways, sometimes thrown. I've made thrown pitchers. I've made thrown gravy boats that are normally round. But I like to modify things just to see what happens. I kept these 2 because they have a nice balance between form and glaze. This pairing of ambiguous but sensual forms grew out of a quandary of what to do with tall extruded cylinders. I had extruded about 10 cylinders and was a bit overwhelmed with where to start. In contrast to the mechanically thrown cylinders from my early college days, I wanted these to have a life. So I started rubbing and contouring them, and before long, they came alive in unexpected ways. I kept these 2 since they seemed to go together, not unlike how humans find partners. This grouping in the middle of the gallery, these are serving pieces typical of my form explorations and painterly glazing and the kinds of things that I normally make and sell to the public. The two trays in the foreground were made from thrown rims with no bottoms and then cut loose from the wheel and added to slabs, allowing the rims to be stretched and manipulated. This is an example of me combining techniques. The decorations come from several trays and bins I have of interesting little markers and textures that I've collected over the years. And I'll show examples of those at the end of the slideshow as well. Many of my potter friends elsewhere have wood-fired kilns available to them in some way, through schools or cooperative firings. It's a labor-intensive process with gathering the wood that's needed, curing it, cutting it, and the 5 to 7 day firing cycles, night and day, that's necessary to stoke the kiln. The flame paths and wood ash affects and coats the clay surfaces with a natural glaze. The results are often spectacular, uneven, and unpredictable, and many do not survive. I've been fortunate to get a few pieces in those kilns as a favor, and these are the results. I began to notice that a certain combination of glazes, banded in a certain order, yielded driplets that resembled tornadoes to me. So I encouraged this behavior on certain forms and called them the tornado pods. Something that resonates here in the Midwest, probably with some people. I kept some of the best for myself, perhaps as totems to ward off the real twisters. Here are some close-ups of what those tornado driplets look like. And these are 2 cups from the tornado series, but these are made from a technique called extruding. And from an extruder is a device not unlike a large Play-Doh fun factory. I extrude long strips of clay and then bend them like paper, forming a handle and adding a bottom. It's a very different twist on an old form. One of the interesting displays in the exhibition is a grouping of teapots from over the years. Teapots are for potters what wedding cakes are for bakers, a proof of skill set and vision. Potters evaluate other potters by how well balanced their teapots are. And the balance is not just in the heft, but also in the visual form from all angles, from the glazing, the concept, and the presentation. It should be inviting and effortless. Teapots are a marker over the years as well, as styles and directions evolve in individual potters. My best estimate is that I have made over 4,000 teapots over the years. I realize that many of my teapots I make are never probably used for tea, and that it may be a testimony to the success of them as objects of visual enjoyment as well. So this is a close-up of the one teapot kind of in the middle foreground. What I like about it is that it has a sort of a quality that it's still soft, it's still alive, it has a little bit of a dancing quality to it. And the other thing that I liked, and this is one of those little things that, you know, when you're in the field, you get interested in the tiny details. As the teapot fired, the spout pulled up a little bit, almost touching the top of the teapot, but there's a gap there of about 1 millimeter, which to me is like, that's the magic of when you take things out of the kiln, you get this little special surprise. Every firing that I have has probably a dozen or more of small bowls in it. I like playing with small bowls, their shapes, the proportions, the surface work, the glazing. Their size, like coffee cups, allows for an intimacy of engagement and pondering of the details. They harken back to those first tea bowls that I made. Turning the form, looking inside, looking underneath, a few moments of meditation and pleasure often emerge. When filled with a preferred taste treat like oatmeal or tea or soup or dessert, the pleasure takes over. Over the years, I would get opportunities for large public projects. Most have been within the county, some at Purdue or Ivy Tech or other institutions, or for the city, for Lafayette. A few have been in collaboration with other artists, notably Linda Vanderkook. Together, we applied for an international competition at the Mathematical Sciences Research Institute in Berkeley, California, and believed that we had no hope of winning. Well, we won, and then we had to make the 950 plus tiles here and transport them to California for assembly and installation. Large projects are never dull. The drawings in the lower left of that cabinet are the reference work for that mural out in California. You can see a little better here. And the things in the lower right corner, those are the tiles or the templates for the tiles that we made to fill the space. One of the things I like to do is travel, and quite often the travel will come back with me and inspire me to make some new shapes, new forms, try some new techniques. This vase was inspired by a trip to a game preserve in South Africa with a side visit to a handcraft village. It's made completely by stretching and coaxing a tall cylinder of clay, using only my hands to shape the form. And then I added a few decorations before I glazed it. These pieces are also come from some travel inspirations. My wife Karen is a retired teacher of Japanese language, and we've been to Japan a couple of times. Over the years, I've made things that hang on the walls, wall vases or wall pockets. The first ones I made a long time ago were thrown on the wheel and then smashed against the wall or on a flat work table. As time went by, I started using the extruder to make wall pieces. This latest iteration of wall forms are inspired by a Japanese style that utilizes asymmetric and natural forms that respond to the art of arrangement called ikebana. These are my feeble attempts to respond to that inspiration. We'll get to the extruder shortly, but these pieces are both made on the extruder, and the lower one is inspired by bridges that we saw in Japanese gardens. The bridges in Japanese gardens transport you from one setting to another, or one season to another, or one, like it might be a low level or a pond setting to a hilly setting. And the bridges are sort of this transition where your mind adapts as you move through the garden. And they come in a variety of methods and forms in Japan, and I was inspired by them. I wanted to do something when we got back home that responded to that arched shape. In the exhibition is another grouping, not unlike the teapot grouping, of cups. Cups and teapots are both a quick measure of a potter's skill and imagination. Teapots must be visually and practically balanced and stand well both in use and at rest. And the same may be said for cups, but it is often at a more personal level with the user. The user will say, "This is my cup," or "This cup suits my mood today," or "This cup reminds me of a friend or a place or a time in my life." Over the years, I have made thousands of cups in many, many styles. Some are traditional and some are kind of wacky, but they always find a home. I've made large slab vases in many ways over the years. They started out as scribbles on paper, trying crazy loopy forms, and then focusing on the few that seemed plausible to actually make. I have done them individually and as families. I kept the one on the left, I should say, mostly because of the fortuitous drip, as I call it, that was about to melt and fall off the vase, but I stopped the kiln just before it fell. I wasn't aware, because I can't see inside the kiln to see what's going on, But when I opened up the kiln the next day, there was this little drip that makes the piece still look fluid, makes it look a little bit liquid, even though it's a hard solid now. It was a nice gift from the kiln. This is a relative, this piece here is a relative of the previously double hold vase in the sense that I made them in about the same time series, in time scale would have been last summer, last fall. This one has a very active brush surface. It's one of the tallest forms I've made. It's not quite as tall as that grouping of 3 earlier, but it's a very large form. Even though I call it a vase and there is a hole at the top where you could put things in, I'm much more interested in the dynamics and the proportions of it as a sculptural form. Since we're talking about working at large scale, occasionally I like to sort of test myself and see if I'm as good as I might think that I am. So now and then I'll work at a very large scale on the wheel, and this is a very large bowl from 1 lump of clay. And the trick, I think, is to make it not look like like you're just trying to show off. I wanted this to look liquidy. I wanted it to look fluid. I wanted it to look a little bit like the clay was still soft. So it has a very flaring quality to it, coming down to a very narrow base. It would hold way more food than you could probably serve 10 people, but it was fun to make. This series that's in the center of the McDonald Gallery, along with some recent predecessors, are a reaction to landscapes that we have seen as we've traveled. We've been fortunate enough to go to a variety of countries and terrains in recent years. These forms are a reaction in some ways to the terrain, but also to the culture that we travel through. It's not a direct one-to-one kind of inspiration. These things come to me when I'm least expecting it, and I'll scribble down a drawing and go from there with it. And these 3 in particular kind of related to each other, even though they're glazed quite differently. But I will probably continue working on these large pieces, even though they have a very narrow market. I still have quite a few that I've made that I still have not sold. This grouping, also in the McDonald Gallery, was a sort of a response to Michael Crothers said, "Are you making anything special for the show?" And I hadn't really thought about it. And so I sort of tucked it at the back of my mind. And as we worked toward gathering pieces for the show, and this whole process started about a year ago to start putting the show together. At the back of my mind, I wanted to come up with something that was not to be expected, not what people would expect to see from me. And so this group was an intentional move to get away from perfection and inject a little humor into the forms. They were done specifically for this show, and they're related to some slab trays that I'd been doing earlier in the year. They were made quickly and without regard to refining the surfaces. Each vase, if you notice, they're triangular. Each vase has 3 faces, and each face has a face on it that has a different expression. By rotating how the vases face each other, the family interrelationships fluctuate. You're never quite sure what you will face as you rotate. And does this seem familiar to any people with large families? Also in the show are posters of detail enlargements of certain glaze areas, some of the pieces in the show and some not. I like for my glaze and decorative work to take your eyes on a ride as you explore the platters or sculptures or whatever. And these are just a few examples. So when you visit, please take time and let yourself sort of fall into the pieces. Look at them and let the glazes and the shapes draw you in. So this is the end of the exhibition part of the talk. And if you want a little bit more, we'll move on to some techniques and tools. These are tools that I use for decorating, creating textures, marking pieces. They are a collection of things that I have found or made myself or adapted. Some are just natural objects like seed pods. Some are gears from insides of toys. Some are little carved wooden pieces. Some are things that I find when we're traveling in markets. And this is one fraction of what I have. This is probably 10% of what I have. All of them have been used at some point over the years. They're made out of wood, plastic, fired clay, linoleum, just about anything that I can adapt, I will use. One of the most probably common techniques that people are familiar with is wheel throwing. That's a technique usually on an electric wheel, but some people have kick wheels or other kind of wheels. And it allows you to speed up your production. What you see behind me on that look like a stack of plates is, those are called bats, and they allow me to throw a piece and then move on to the next piece without having it stuck on the wheel and unable to be removed. So as I finish the piece, I can move that to the shelves and start with a fresh bat. There's another technique that I use a lot called press molding, which is not unlike putting pie dough in a pie plate. I have a variety of shapes, and you roll out a slab of clay, put texture on it if you want, and then drape it down into the form. And the next day it'll be dry enough to pop out. And then I can add handles to it if I want, and then finish it with a glaze. This is like a small vegetable plate or fish tray. Extruding, I've referred to it several times, is a technique that uses a leverage on a thing that's not unlike a very large Play-Doh fun factory. You put the clay in at the top, you put the plunger in, you pull on the plunger, and depending on the shape of the die you have, you get a tube of clay. Now, this is actually what they do out at Alcoa with aluminum. And so on the left is the rough extrusion, and then I manipulate it and add a bottom and a top and a handle and a spout to form a teapot in this case. So after the pieces are made, they go into the kiln for a first firing called a bisque firing. This is where all the moisture is driven off and the pieces are rendered hard enough to absorb a glaze without redissolving. Then they all go into the glazing room and I glaze, and I have about 12 reliable glazes that I use. That's what those buckets are. And the glazing process takes 2 to 3 days, sometimes more. And then the pieces go back into the kiln. There's me doing some glazing. These are some of the extruded teapots. The glaze does not look like its final color. So all those teapots that look like they're going to be white, those turn red. The teapots that are brown, some of the browns get golden, some of the browns look like leather. You have to know your glazes to know what they're going to turn out like. And even then, sometimes the kiln gives you a bad firing. But that's part of the excitement and the frustration. So they go back into the kiln, and the kiln is stacked strategically. It's too difficult to go into now. And then I brick it up with a bunch of other bricks as a door, and then the kiln fires. using propane gas, and it goes to 2150 degrees Fahrenheit. And it takes a whole day, and then it cools overnight into the next afternoon. And then I can, once it's cool enough, I can start removing the pieces. So that's the end of the slideshow. Caitlin, if you want to open up for questions, I'm willing to answer what I can.
Yeah, sure. Guys, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them in the chat or in the comments if you're watching via Facebook. We have one right now that she wants to know. She says, "You're so known for the dark glazes. What prompted you to do the light, the white, the blue, the red pieces?"
You know, it was something that just kind of came over me. It was a point in my life where there was a transition going on. And I think I just had to sort of answer this call. It's a little hard to explain, but it was, I needed to get the cobwebs out. I was so accustomed to doing the red glazes. I had mastered it enough so that they were coming out reliably. And like I said, the scuba diving trips, if you've ever done snorkeling or scuba diving, it's a whole different world under there. And it sort of entered my subconscious and had to manifest itself somehow. And so suddenly I found myself decorating very differently than I had, and it was exciting. I don't know quite how else to answer that.
Someone else says, "You've been a working artist for decades. What was the biggest challenge balancing art and commerce?"
Well, one of the things that Kendall didn't mention in the intro was that when I went to college, my intention was to major in mathematics. And I was not sure what I was going to do with that, but I was very comfortable working with numbers and maintaining records of things and, you know, stuff like that. And so I think when it came to time to think about being a working artist, working for my own money, not depending on a teaching job, I kept ledgers right from the beginning. Of course, this was long before there was such a thing as Excel, before spreadsheets, before anything like that. It was actual paper ledgers with handwritten columns. Also, the professor I had at the time, Marge Levy, I can't thank her enough for how she allowed for my career to get off the ground. She taught the graduate students about such things as record keeping and taxes and what accountants do that are helpful to you, how to approach galleries, how to do the business of being an artist. And so I had an advantage, I think, at the beginning that I didn't have a professor who was, you know, only about making artwork that never sold or, you know, close to that. So I had those two factors going for me, and it was always reasonably effortless to think about this as a business, but also a business where I could be creative.
Carol asks, "How long did it take you to throw an acceptable bowl on the wheel?"
Well, depends on what you mean by acceptable. Acceptable by who or whom? Yes, my first ceramics class in college was probably a notable disaster. My actual interest at the time was in drawing and printmaking. Clay was something that we had to take as a three-dimensional. You know, we had to do something that was 3D. So I would say probably not until maybe 2 or 3 years later. I didn't really have access to a studio full time, so it was kind of when the opportunity existed. And probably when I was working at Harrison High School, where there was wheels available, and I would practice on the wheel in between classes so that I was a little bit ahead of the students. That's where I started getting some reliable facility with working on the wheel, where I could sit down and make what I had in mind to make.
Great. Tom Bridge wants to know, he asks, did you just do the one wood firing, or did you do any more?
I've actually succeeded in getting wood-fired pieces without ever having to be at a wood firing, without having to lug the wood and stoke the wood and all that. I have several friends in Indiana who have wood firing kilns, and we cross paths now and then. And every now and then they would say, well, if you have something you want to put in the kiln, next time we see each other, hand it off to me. And so altogether, I probably have less than 20 wood-fired pieces, but it's not because I've been a good participant. I owe some people some midnight stoking someday. Now, for those of you who don't know what a wood firing is, it's loading a kiln with hundreds of pots. And then you have to stoke the kiln night and day with wood that you have cut and split and dried months before. And the firing process takes about a week. And then it takes another 5 or 6 days for the kiln to cool down. And then you have to unload it and clean everything. It's hard work. So I've been fortunate to get some wood-fired pieces without having to do all that work. I'm not proud of that.
Someone asks, do you think the internet has changed the practice of ceramics with things like sharing glaze formulas, etc.?
Oh yeah. Back in the Stone Age, when I was in graduate school, which was around 1973, 72, 3 and 4, people were very secretive about their glazes. And so when books, books that got used in classrooms were coming out, the authors would have to pry glaze recipes out of other potters, or they would have to come up with their own recipes for the books. And those were our only reference. Your teacher might have a list of glazes that they had from their own schooling. And it was only when, the internet started opening up that people started sharing glazes either on purpose or accidentally. And slowly, over the past, I'd say for sure the past 5 years, there's been an explosion of access to glaze recipes from all over the world. So it's gotten to the point where there's too many glazes to try out, to test.
And I'm actually going to start pulling some questions from Facebook here.
Okay.
Lori Amick wants to know, where does your work go from here?
I think she means my explorations, not the unsold pieces that I have sitting in my workshop right now. That's a good question. I sort of feel like in the case of the red glaze, which helped put 2 kids through college, that's for sure, paid a lot of bills. I feel a little bit of a freedom maybe to move on and try some glazes. And I've actually been doing that over the past year, inspired by glazes I've seen in Japan in particular, where I want to get away from something that is going to reliably sell, and maybe something that pleases me visually, but maybe I'm the only one that's really going to end up liking it. Now that's dangerous, because that means I'm going to end up with a big pile of unsold pottery as they shove me off to a nursing home. But I want to try. I think I want to keep within the bounds of making largely functional work with the occasional sculptural explorations. But I'm probably going to be making things that are not necessarily with a market in mind.
Let's see here. Who's next? So many questions. Lynn wants to know if you ever do salt firings.
I haven't done any for a good 20 years. Part of the reason for that is that salt firing, not unlike wood firing, is labor intensive. While the kiln is firing, you have to feed it with half-pound units of salt that you throw in while the kiln is firing. And your firing may be 10, 12, 13 hours. And so you have to sit next to the kiln and keep feeding it every 20 minutes or so for the glazes to develop properly. Also, salt kilns are very corrosive on themselves. The chemistry that happens inside the kiln when the salt disassociates is that it eats away at the bricks themselves inside the kiln while chlorine gas is going up the chimney. It's not the healthiest firing technique, but you can get some absolutely spectacular results out of it. And there are many people who combine salt firing with wood firing for the interaction of the two. They'll not exclusively salt, not exclusively wood, but they'll add salt into the wood firing and get some unusual effects. For those who don't know, the kiln bricks and the kiln shelves that you can see in this picture are quite expensive. Each of those bricks costs about $4 or $5 per brick. And the shelves cost anywhere from about $40 to $60 each. So you want to take care of them.
For sure. Cynthia wants to know, how did you transition from classroom to completely on your own as an artist?
Part of that was being young and foolish. I was in my mid-20s, and I sort of thought, I'm enjoying this, it was more than a hobby, but it was not making a living. And I kind of at some point took the mindset that, well, I'm going to give it a shot. If after 2 years it's not working out, then I'll, see about a real job, a quote unquote real job. Because as anybody knows, being a potter full-time is a real job. But fortunately, the community that I chose to live in here got behind me. There was a supportiveness that I guess I didn't expect at first. And, they've been behind me ever since and helped to make this a good living.
Jerry wants to know, what is the advantage of wood firing?
Well, the advantage, the advantage is you get surfaces unlike you get in a regular kiln. I'm generalizing, but in general, pieces go into the kiln with almost no glaze on them, or sort of a partially glazed surface, mostly on the inside, maybe a little bit on the outside of the pieces. And the actual glazing comes from the wood ash that flies around inside the kiln during the combustion phase. And so, the pieces depend on placement. The pieces depend somewhat on your experience with the kiln. It depends on the kind of wood that you use. Some woods are better than others. And the results are somewhat unreliable. That's why a lot of wood fire people fire the wood fire kilns, is they like the unexpected results. It's like high fire Raku. But if somebody says, well, I want a dinner set where all the plates have this color on it, you're not going to get that with wood firing. unless the customer is willing to accept a lot of variation.
Ebony would like to know, what do you find special about the art community in Greater Lafayette?
Well, I can't imagine a more supportive group of people. You know, they work together on everything to make it happen for everybody. It's rare, at least in this community, to find a selfish artist, somebody who, you know, is like, oh no, I can't help out with that. And I'm busy that weekend or whatever. People step up and spread the word about each other. I noticed when this virtual talk was starting to be advertised, fellow artists were sharing it all over the place, so that you know, friends and friends of friends and friends and friends of friends might be interested in seeing this. Well, it's that network of support and interest. You know, people are always interested in what you're doing next, depending on, you know, who that artist is. You know, we had a question from Lori Amick earlier, and Lori has done some of the most amazing experimental work in this community. And, you know, she's gone out on a limb a million times, taking risks that nobody else might do. And it's, you know, it's that kind of inspiration and that kind of willingness to try things out, and other people are with you all the way.
Tom Bridge would like to know, how is the pandemic impacting your artist friends and their ability to market their pieces? With festivals turned off, are people able to do other innovative marketing?
I haven't done any, you know, big research in this area. I only know what I sort of have seen with friends on Facebook or other social media that, you know, they're talking about what they're doing or not doing. In the cases of some people, they've turned to Etsy, but since everybody's turning to Etsy, it just gets even more competitive there. So you have to, you know, kind of be smart about how you market yourself. Other people do virtual things. They'll do videos of their work or videos of a process, or, you know, something. They set up maybe a dozen videos of them doing different techniques, and you offer them to the public as an example of, well, maybe you can do this too, you know, but in the meantime, I have some pottery for sale. So things like that happen. I've also seen people do like a little mini show, private show. They and another artist will set up a sale or a show, you know, for a weekend, kind of like a pop-up, either in a home or in a garage, or, you know, an out barn or something, as a way of, you know, it's kind of like, you know, a special experience that might not happen again. There has to be some social distancing involved, and so they have to work around that. I've seen a variety of some very innovative, and some, you know, it's like you see that and you go, you know, that's not going to work out. You tell yourself. But artists are, you know, don't give up. I'm sure, as in my case, that there's been an income drop. One of the things I've had happen in my direction, and it's maintained my income, but it hasn't enhanced it, is I'm getting a lot of orders from people who have broken things or lost things or need a birthday present, but they don't want to go into a store. And so I'm benefiting from that, but it's sort of covering my costs. It's not boosting my income.
Tom also asks, can you tell us about the commission piece for Lafayette that's on Main Street?
Yes. the non-ceramic sculpture at 11th and Main Street in honor of the railroads in Lafayette. It came about, I can't remember the exact year, but there was a call out for public sculptures in Lafayette. And I thought, well, I'd like to do something, but I don't know what. And I was a little bit averse to doing it with clay, but I wasn't sure what material I wanted to explore. And I was on a trip down to Crawfordsville for an art show with a friend. And as we drove down, there were these big stacks of railroad ties. They had recently replaced them with this crazy machine, if you've ever seen it work, where they take the ties out and put new ones in without disturbing the rails at all. But anyway, they throw the old railroad ties off to the side, and then somebody comes along, stacks them up and takes them away. And I thought, you know, you could probably make something out of those. And so I mulled over it and did some drawings and came up with some ideas and finally put together a proposal, and I submitted it to the Lafayette. There's a committee that reviews proposals when there's public money available for public sculpture. And it was accepted. And so once again, I had to make it. And I didn't know how to weld, but I had some friends who knew how to weld, and one thing led to another, and we put it together, and there it is. And it stands sort of as a memorial to the railroads that used to pass through Lafayette across there were two railroad lines, and they were infuriating because they always seemed to have a train on them when you needed to get to the doctor's office. So they're gone now, but that stands as a testimonial to all the commerce and transportation they brought to Lafayette.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions that we had submitted. Let me double check on Facebook here. Yes. So seeing there a couple of people did join late. Just so you know, if you did kind of tune in the middle of it, it should be available. This gallery talk should be available on our Facebook page after the live broadcast. That's generally how it works. So you should be able to still tune in. If not, you can still, we are, let me start my video back up here. We are actually releasing a series of videos. We've already released several of them of Scott talking about his work, kind of walking through the exhibit, and giving some insight into his work as well. Those can be found on our YouTube page, and also there's some of them on our website as well under the current exhibits page. Well, I think that's it. Scott, do you have any final words you want to share with anybody, or?
None right now. I mean, if people have some questions that come up later, feel free to reach out to me through Facebook, or my email is on my website, scottfrankenberger.com, and I'll do my best to answer. But it's been fun to do this, fun to put this together and share all these years of work with people, both here online on this virtual talk, and also what's in the exhibition. I hope people can get down and see the exhibition in person.
Yeah, so also for those of you who joined late, you might not have heard the announcement that the museum is currently open by reservation for members. We are doing hours on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. You can go to our website to reserve your time slot. That's just to help us limit capacity and make sure that everything is properly cleaned and sanitized in between visits. On July 7th, we will be opening to anyone who wants to come. You still need a reservation, but you can definitely, if you're not a member, consider joining. But if you're not able to at this point, please come see us in July. Scott, your exhibit is amazing. I don't know much about pottery, but I walked in and I was like, this is so beautiful. Your work is beautiful. And you and Michael just displayed it so lovely. It's really a great exhibit. I hope that everybody who tuned in today will at least be, if they're not able to come in person, that they can go online and watch those videos and kind of explore it that way as well. So thank you so much for
Yeah.
being with us
Well,
tonight.
let me interrupt you and
Yeah.
say, if the exhibition had been left up to me, it would have looked like an art fair. Thanks to Michael for making it look as special as it does. He is a wizard.
He is, yes. Yes, he is. He does incredible things in those galleries
Yeah.
For every show that we put on. But yours is really stunning. So
Thank you.
thank you again for everyone who tuned in tonight. We really appreciate your support. And Scott, thank you so much for sharing your work and your experience and answering the questions from our guests.
Thank
Y'all
you.
stay safe, stay well, make some art, or come see ours. So have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
This was amazing to see you describe your process. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Thea. And I did mention Harrison High School. Did you hear that?
I almost chatted and said he was my teacher. And then when you were talking about making the plates, I remembered the first time we told you somebody wanted a matching set of plates when you were in Good Earth and things. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it was great. It was
Mhm.
wonderful down memory lane for me on lots of
Oh, good.
take care.
Yeah, you too.